Good evening, and thank you for joining our Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee for tonight's virtual presentation and question and answer period. My name is Melissa Bevan, and I'm the chair of DCPIC. I'd like to introduce our Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee executive team, Rose Lopresti, Vice Chair, Aaron Grout, our Secretary and Treasurer. As we begin this evening, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we here in the Durham region are on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. I'd like to begin this evening with a prayer for the safe and healthy return of families and staff to school. I invite you to join me in making the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of grace and love, we thank you for the opportunities awaiting us this year, the fresh starts, the new beginnings, and the chances to reconnect. Help us to make good choices this year as we learn to be together again. Restore balance and peace in our school community. Guide us in word and action to welcome, value, and celebrate all members of our community as your beloved children. Remind us to always walk in your light with hope in the goodness of our community. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I hope everyone has had a safe and happy and healthy summer. As a parent, I know this has been a difficult time and lots of information about the return to school keeps changing. And I want to thank all the parents and guardians who sent us questions in advance of tonight's forum. We received 209 questions regarding the 2021-2022 school year. It's our goal this evening to answer as many questions as possible. If we don't get to all the questions, please visit the Return to Learning webpage at www.dcdsb.ca. This page is your best source for the latest updates, documents, and questions and answers. This forum is being recorded, and we will post this recording on our Return to Learning webpage for our families who were not able to join us this evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce members of the board's senior admin team. First off, we have Tracy Burrell, the Director of Education. We have Scott Greaves, Superintendent of Business, Finance, and Facilities. Marie Hammond, Chief Financial Officer. Superintendents of Education, Susie Lee Fernandez, Heather Abraham, Mike O'Neill, and Mariah O'Reilly. We have Ronald Rodriguez, our Chief Information Officer. Jim Wilson, Superintendent of Education and the Director Designate for our DCPIC, and Gerard Wynn, Superintendent of Education. Tonight's agenda includes a presentation led by Director Burrell. This will be followed by questions we have received from parents and guardians in advance of tonight's forum. I'd now like to call Director Burrell to lead us through tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate that introduction, and thank you to the DCPIC for hosting this information session for our parents. We do realize, as you mentioned, that there are so many questions right now that people want answered, and we really appreciate the patience and understanding of our parent community as we navigate through all of the information that has been shared with us from the Ministry of Education and try to work with our principals and vice principals and staff to make sure that everybody is on the same page as we interpret that information and put it into practice. Hopefully through our presentation this evening, a number of the questions that were asked will be answered. And then I do know, as you mentioned, there will be a question and answer period at the end. So today we'd like to begin first by sharing with everyone that our spiritual theme for 2021-2022 for the Durham Catholic District School Board is a community of faith. This spiritual theme was intentionally selected. We recognize that the last 18 months has been a time where we have been very challenged by the layers of protection and the physical distancing that has been put in place to remain connected spiritually and emotionally to one another. And although we are still navigating the fourth wave and the Delta variant, we are looking forward, hopefully, to a more fulsome return to school than we have experienced experienced in the past year, and an opportunity for our Catholic learning community to reconnect with one another, to renew those friendships and those bonds, and to rebuild that experience for our students. So our spiritual theme is always connected to a particular biblical passage. And in this year, the biblical passage that we have chosen is 1 Corinthians 12, 26 to 27, which speaks about the members of the body of Christ. And it says, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. You will note the beautiful artwork on this screen that we will use as a kind of a focus point for us as we navigate this new school year. So as we get into our presentation this evening, I know that oftentimes people wonder why we don't have all of the answers as quickly as everyone would like. We did share this particular slide last year, but just as we start out our presentation for today, we wanted to just remind people of the complexity of the organization that we work within, and the number of different partners and organizations and ministries that are involved in providing the direction that we land on, and ultimately the experience that we have in classrooms. So as a board of education, we are governed by a board of trustees that are elected members of our local community who represent the broader Catholic community in terms of governance decision making. In terms of operations, I am the director of education and and the secretary treasurer to the board, which means all operational matters fall under me and through me to the rest of the staff in the board. From there, we have our principals, vice principals, and managers who really are the meat and potatoes of everything, because they are the people that help us to take theoretical policy, practice, and direction and put it into reality in our schools for our students. We also have a joint occupational health and safety committee that operates at a system level in the board that is responsible for providing recommendations to us regarding the health and safety of our staff members and our employees. In terms of making decisions, you see a number of circles on this screen here. The Durham Catholic District School Board is required to take direction from the Ministry of Education. And I would say that in COVID times, that's even more pronounced than in regular times because of the emergency procedure protocols that have been put in place at a provincial level. The ministry has more control over boards and what boards need to do. But we don't only take direction from the Ministry of Education. We also have other ministries like the Ministry of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services that is providing our PPE, the Ministry of Labor, because we are a large employer and we have to make sure that our work environments are safe as well. So all of those different ministries give us different directions about things that we have to try to put together into something that makes sense. We work with a variety of different stakeholder groups who represent our employees. And you can see those on the left, our administrative professionals, Coop, ETFO, OWECTA, our principal, vice principal association, CPCO, our middle management and non-union groups. And we also have a consortium. So when it comes to transportation, we are working in a consortium with the Durham District School Board. So some of our decisions, especially around transportation, are not ours alone to make. We have to make them in consultation with the public board and with the consortium of DSTS. So it's all it's a little bit of a complex picture. You'll see on the side there the Durham Public Health Unit. We were very fortunate this past year to work closely with our partners at Durham Region Public Health, and we continue to do so in the year ahead. And lastly, on the other side of the screen there, you see a number of different groups: the Council of Directors, the English Catholic Council of Directors, the GTA Networking Group, and so on. These are also other consultation groups that we work with, so that when we get direction from the Ministry of Education and we're trying to interpret that, we always try to stay connected to these other partners to stay abreast of what is going on in other parts of the province and in other boards. The decisions that we make locally here in Durham Region will not always be an exact mirror of what's made elsewhere, but we are always informed by what other boards are doing as well, and then trying to make the best decision for our local context. So once again, and this I think is the only repeat slide, but we also want to remind people that as we return in September, we're very excited by the increased number of vaccinations in the province, because those vaccinations really help to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And we're excited to see those high numbers. But notwithstanding that, vaccinations are not our only form of protection against COVID-19. We will continue to be relying upon this hierarchy of controls that we have worked with over the past year and a bit in order to be able to maintain safety in our schools. So one of the very basic pieces around that is making sure that people who have COVID symptoms are not entering into our buildings. So things like self-screening on a daily basis and so on will continue. Our hand hygiene protocols, our respiratory etiquette, reminding children of that. Physically distancing will continue to be a part of our life, but there will be some changes that will allow for more social interaction. Ventilation, we will talk about a little bit more later in the presentation today. But again, these are all pieces of the puzzle that help us to make sure that we are keeping our schools as safe as possible as we return to the classroom. And so whenever people ask me about a particular piece, whether it be masking or vaccinations and so on, I always like to remind people that, yes, that is one piece of the puzzle that we have in order to try to reduce the spread of COVID-19, but it's not the whole story of what goes on in our schools. So going back to one of those most important pieces of the layers of protection is the COVID-19 self-assessment. Once again this year, all people who enter into our schools, so our staff, our students, and any visitors to the school will be required to self-assess before coming to school. One of the things that I'd like to make parents aware of is that the symptom list for COVID-19 this year has changed a little bit. And for that reason, I always encourage people to go back to the link that you see on the screen right now, the COVID-19 Ontario Schools self-screening. That self-screening tool is the one that is kept up to date by the Ministry of Health, and really is the screening that goes through the series of questions and answers that will provide parents and other visitors to the school with a definitive direction on whether or not they're safe to enter into our school buildings. Again, I just would say that the screening list has changed a little bit. They've also incorporated now into this screening questions regarding vaccination, because some of the protocols for self-isolation and so on differ now depending on whether or not you're fully immunized or not immunized at all. So again, please make sure that you go back to that. And lastly, in terms of confirmation of self-screening, we have been asked just recently this week, I think it was yesterday, we received the memo to ensure that for the first 2 weeks of school, we are having a confirmation of self-screening that is coming in every day. And I think that's to get people in the habit of making sure that they are actually thinking about those symptoms every day before they themselves or they come to school or before they send their children to school. And so for our elementary students, last year our secondary students had a confirmation of self-screening. They used this little tool, and if they had a mobile device, they were able to fill it out and show their teachers as they were coming in, whether or not they had that green check mark in order to be able to enter. We recognize that our elementary students don't all have mobile devices, and so we've worked on a take-home paper that would be signed daily by the parents to indicate that they have done that self-assessment and that their children are able to come to school. One of the big areas of questioning that we've had over the past couple of weeks is the whole notion of masks. So as per last year, our students in kindergarten will be strongly encouraged but not required to wear masks, whereas our students in grades 1 to 12 will be required to wear a non-medical or cloth mask while they are indoors. All students who take the bus, if they're on the bus, no matter what age or grade they are, they will be required to wear a mask while they are on the bus. A bit of a change this year right now at this point in time is that when students are outside for outdoor recess and so on, masks will not be required at that time. We often get asked, like, why are we not mandating that our kindergarten students wear masks all the time? I would say that our kindergarten teachers do a pretty good job of encouraging our students to do that. And we had a very large compliance, a very large number of parents and students in kindergarten who did wear masks all through last year. But the advice that we've received from our medical advisors, including our own medical advisor here in Durham region, is that wearing a mask, especially for children of that young age, sometimes can be more of a hazard than a help, because we know that masks, to be effective, have to be properly put on and properly taken off. We know that they have to remain clean and so on. And we also know that children of that young age don't project those droplets as far as older children and so on do. And so we do feel that the provincial direction on this and our local chief medical officer's direction on this is the way to go. And so we will be continuing to do that this year. For the following slide, I'm going to turn to our Superintendent of Facility Services, Scott Grieve, who's going to talk a little bit about ventilation.
Thank you, Director Burrell, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening to our DPIC community. Just a few updates on the air handling and ventilation in our schools. We have upgraded all of our filters in the mechanical systems from a MERV 8 to a MERV 13. We had started that process last year and continuing it this year, and we're looking to do those filter changes a minimum of 4 times in each of the mechanical systems across the schools. We also are going to continue to bring in more fresh air by opening the dampers on our mechanical units and also running them longer, 2 hours before and 2 hours at the end of the day. That's always weather permitting, just based on the time of year. It can become challenging to maintain comfort in the middle of winter by having your dampers wide open, but we do our best to make sure that we bring in all the fresh air that we can. We've also purchased 1,000 HEPA units, which were rolled out to our elementary schools last year, and they'll be continued to be in place for this year. And over the summer, we've been procuring more HEPA units for our secondary classrooms, and we hope to have them all in place by mid to late September in all of our secondary classrooms.
Thank you, Scott. One of the questions that we have received is just people are interested in having a sense of the number of students who are enrolled in face-to-face learning versus remote learning options. And so we are providing on this slide just a breakdown by percentage. So we have close to 95% of our elementary students who are returning to learning in-person bricks and mortar schools, and about just a little over 5% who have selected the virtual learning option through the Durham Catholic Virtual Elementary School. In our secondary, those numbers are pretty close to the same. 94.5% of our secondary students are selected in-person learning for this school year, and we have a little bit over about 5.5% of students who have currently selected the hybrid model. So I'm going to ask now for our Superintendent of Academic Services, Mariah O'Reilly, to, am I talking to Mariah or Gerard? I'll turn it over to either of them right now to speak about our learning formats.
Thank you, Director Burrell, and Superintendent O'Reilly. You can jump in anytime here. It's great to be here, and thanks everyone for joining us. So on the previous slide, we were referencing how many expressed an interest in virtual and in-person learning. So we did reach out to our parents and guardians in the spring 2 times to ask them to make a commitment for the upcoming school year. And so once again, we want to provide as much stability for our staff and our students moving forward. So we have provided an option for in-person learning, and then at the elementary panel, Anyone who expressed an interest in remote learning has been registered in our Durham Catholic Virtual Elementary School for this September. And then if there are any extenuating circumstances, we'd ask that you reach out to a school administration, of course. And then moving on to our secondary hybrid model. This is something that began in second semester of last school year. And so our students who sought an interest in remote learning were able to be connected to their home schools. And so an example of that is they have their home school, their teachers, and there might be a class where if they're registered in a math class, or it could be a science class, and there could be 20 students in person at the brick and mortar school, and there could be 3 or 4 students potentially that would be learning from home using a platform. And teachers and schools will reach out to their students and parents in the coming days, probably by the end of this week, to talk about platforms and instructional minutes and what to expect. And as always, there will be a secure password and sign-in credentials available as well too. And then when we look a little more closely at secondary learning formats, so on the next slide, we have, once again, we did ask parents to express an interest. And very similar to the elementary panel as well, too, if there are extenuating circumstances that do come up, we do ask you to reach out to the brick and mortar secondary schools. Our opportunities for transitions will occur after each of the quadmesters. We do ask that if you're interested in joining in-person learning at the brick and mortar schools, to reach out to those schools ASAP. And then if you wish to transition into brick and mortar schools or have a transition, it has to be at the end of each quadmester. So it can't be during the quadmester, and you're making a commitment for the quadmester. And I will turn it over to Superintendent O'Reilly.
Thank you, Superintendent Wynne. So when we're talking about in-class models, this year, our elementary and secondary schools will resume regular full-time instruction 5 days a week. Now, this is not much of a change for elementary. Elementary students were coming to school 5 days a week last year, but secondary students were coming to school one day and then having remote learning or working from home the next day. So for secondary students, this is a change. They will return to being back at school every day. And the hours of operation for schools are available on the school's website. They're also on this next slide, which we will move to. That for secondary, there are changes to some of the start and end times. They may be similar to last year, but changes from the year before. So please go on and check those out. As far as secondary, as I said, so our high school students will attend school every day, and you will receive a schedule from your school so that you know your schedule for the first quadmester. We are in quadmesters again right now, at least for the first semester. That was the direction of the ministry, and so we will stick with that. So we have 2 subjects that we will be doing in the first quadmester, and you will come to school and attend the first subject for 150 minutes, where there will then be a lunch break, and you'll have your second subject for 150 minutes, which is sort of like a double period, and that will be the secondary school day. And I believe Dr. Burrell is speaking to this.
Thank you. So we wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the operational guidance that we have received from the Ministry of Education. The one caveat that I would like to say up front right now is that the operational guidance that we have been given came in August. I just got off a call with the Minister of Education with the board chairs, and this operational guidance continues to be our current state of affairs. That being said, one of the important things about managing COVID-19 is being able to be responsive to local conditions and changing case numbers and so on. And so I'm going to tell you what the situation is right now as of today, but I also want to advise people that if things change in the province, either improve or get worse in terms of COVID-19 cases and numbers and variants and so on, this guidance might have to be adjusted as the year goes on. One of our biggest goals is trying to follow this guidance as closely as possible and be responsive to the changing times, because really more than anything, we want to try to ensure that our students are able to stay in school for the whole year if it's at all possible. So right now, these are the things that we know to be true. And again, we will adjust these things, either tighten them up or loosen them, depending upon what our local public health unit and the province tells us. So there is a link that is on this slide as well that will bring anybody in Ontario can go on and see the operational guidance that we are receiving. And I actually think that that's probably the most accurate way of doing it, because if there are changes, it would be reflected on that website. So in terms of some of the changes, I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them is the return of field trips. The Ministry of Education is now allowing field trips, day trips, and even overnight stays, as long as the requirements and protocols are followed with regards to contact tracing and personal protective equipment and so on. Now, I would like to say that the decision to go on field trips remains a local one with your classroom teachers and with your schools, because those are things that they have to navigate. But at this point in time, the province is allowing that to happen with those precautions in place. Our schools will continue to individually communicate with their communities the safety protocols that are required for participation in extracurricular activities. That is another thing that we do have the green light now to go ahead and slowly start to resume. We do have the approval to begin inter-school sports. But one of the things that I'd like to remind parents is that the coaching of those sports has and always has been a voluntary activity. We usually have volunteers from our teaching staff or our education staff who support those extracurricular activities. And the organization that coordinates those inter-school activities, DECA and LASA, those are also voluntary organizations that are a little bit removed from the board office. So they make decisions around things like that as well. They have to operate within the safety protocols that we put in place, but which sports will run and what the protocols will be in terms of running those activities is yet to be developed. But hopefully you will be hearing more about some opportunities for sports and extracurricular activities in your schools soon. Another area that has been adjusted this year is in and around music. Some will remember that there were some restrictions placed upon the use of wind instruments in the past, and also on even just singing. And so there is new guidance contained in this reopening document that will allow for those activities to take place under certain conditions with proper distancing and with the use of masks where it is possible. With regards to physical education in elementary and secondary schools, the use of gyms, the use of common spaces, all of these things are going to be permitted as we move into the fall, again, as long as that physical distancing and masking is taking place. And at this time, both high and low contact activities are permitted indoors, making sure that masking is in place indoors when a sport allows for that to happen safely. If kids are playing sports outdoors, masks are not required. In terms of some subject-specific information around cooperative education, so this is for our secondary schools particularly, in-person community placements are able to be arranged in alignment with the relative provincial requirements. So the directions and recommendations of our local public health unit will be considered as we move forward with that, but we should see an increased opportunity for students to have in-person co-op placements in the year ahead. And again, this is all based on guidance that comes out of the Ministry of Education and is subject to change, but we will try to follow it as we are reviewing our practices for the year ahead. So again, I think I'm going to go back to Superintendent Wynne to talk a little bit more about what learning will look like in our virtual learning schools.
Thank you, Director. And this slide is intended for those who have registered in our Durham Catholic Virtual Elementary School for September. We just want parents, guardians, and students to be aware that classes will start on September 7th, and staff will be reaching out later this week to provide any information that you need to access platforms, just like similar to last year. And we do have school offices currently open. So if there's any situations that have changed where you wish to register for in-person learning, we need that information ASAP, and you should contact the principal of the Durham Catholic Virtual Elementary School, Mike Young, as soon as possible. In terms of looking ahead for provincial assessments for the upcoming school year, we can expect students in grade 3 and grade 6 that are attending in person to complete the EQA online assessment. We're awaiting more details as that unfolds, what it will look like. And in terms of students going into grade 9 for next school year who are attending in person as well in our brick and mortar secondary schools, they will be writing the assessments as well. And we anticipate more information in terms of platforms and what that will look like in the coming months. And looking ahead as well to the Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test. So a few items here. If you are graduating, if you're a student planning to graduate this school year with Durham Catholic, you are exempt from this requirement. However, other students, if you're going into grade 10 or 11, if you're a non-graduating student, you are encouraged to take the literacy test. And then sometimes there's extenuating circumstances, and there's the option of the literacy course or adjudication as well too. And that can be addressed with guidance at your home school as well too. And we anticipate 2 administration timelines, one in the fall and one in the spring as well.
So with regards to our school bus information, our students in kindergarten to grade 12 who are eligible for busing through DSTS will be given assigned seating and will be required to wear a mask while on the bus and complete the COVID-19 self-assessment prior to riding the bus each day. We do have our superintendent, Heather Ibrahim, here, who has just taken over the transportation file. It's a huge file. So Heather, I don't know if you want to say hello or if you have any further comments around DSTS. I know there is information here on how they can contact them.
I just want to say good evening to everyone, and I would be glad to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, just one little reminder, if you're looking for your bus route information for your student or for your child, make sure that you have your OEN, your Ontario Education Number, on hand. That can be found on your child's report card. If you are a new parent with a junior kindergarten or first year kindergarten student, you would contact the school and they'll help you to get that OEN number so that you can access your bus route information. And now I'll turn it over to Superintendent Lee Fernandez to talk about our special education and student services.
Thank you, Director. So as far as special education is concerned, our students will be returning to a full day of instruction along with their peers. Throughout the past couple of years, or maybe a year and a half and a little bit, we have continued to provide special education services to all of our students. Processes and timelines with respect to the creation of IEPs will continue as usual. And that's really a key piece because it is through the IEP that we are able to individualize and provide the appropriate programming that our students need. If you're looking for further details, a really good place to go is our Special Education and Student Services web page on the board website, and the link will be provided there for you. And there is comprehensive information with respect to this variety of student services that are provided, as well as the special education plan for this year. And as we return to school, our top priority is mental health and well-being. We really want to welcome students back with a trauma-informed lens, which is also an asset lens. We know that there have been many different experiences over the past couple of years, And we know that students are excited and maybe a little bit anxious and nervous coming back to school. So we want to keep all those factors in mind and know that every student and family has individual experiences that they're coming back with. So really, we want to nurture well-being. We want to make school a happy place. And we're really going to be focusing on relationships and reconnecting with peers and adults. This is such a unique opportunity to come back with a fresh set of eyes, with growth mindset, as well as it's a fresh and exciting beginning for everybody. The Durham Catholic District School Board, we are well supported through School Mental Health Ontario. We really follow an aligned integrated model where Tier 1 supports cover universal mental health promotion for everyone. Teachers are well supported and well versed through different strategies that support good mental health. Then we also move to Tier 2, which is targeted prevention. For that, we have our social workers who work within various schools to really work with vulnerable students and support their skills and create a safe and accepting school environment for all students. And then we have our Tier 3 interventions, which really help to connect certain students with community health organizations to support very specific mental health needs. What you see in front of you here is our social work access line. We heard from our students as well as staff that sometimes it was easier for our families to fill out forms online. So this was in response to their request so that it would be easier to access our social work services.
That brings us, that brings us to the end of our formal presentation, but at this time, I'll stop sharing my screen because I know that there are a number of questions that have come in from parents that, that members of our DCPIC are going to share with us, and we will try to answer as many as we can.
Thank you, Director Burrell, for tonight's presentation. I'd now like to open the question and answer period. We invited parents and guardians to submit questions to us as part of tonight's presentation. Rose and I will take turns asking the questions that were submitted to the DCPIC. And I will start. The first question we have is, if we need to switch to remote learning at any point in the year, how will you ensure there is a standard for the number of minutes taught based on the ministry guidelines for synchronous and asynchronous learning?
Thank you for that question. And so as we mentioned in the presentation, one of our big goals this year locally and I know provincially is to try to avoid having to pivot to remote learning back and forth, because we know that those transitions are hard on families and they're hard on students and that they can be very complicated. That being said, I would want to draw parents' attention to the fact that the guidance that we received on the number of minutes, for example, of instruction that had to take place and what subjects had to be covered and so on. Those all came in the form of what are called PPMs, program memorandums from the Ministry of Education. In fact, the first time back in, I think it was 2020, I'm losing track, in 2020, when we first had experienced this whole remote learning, there was a different set of expectations that were set up in that spring, in that April, May, June time, than there were the following year in September, October, November, and so on. And so should the province tell us that we have to switch to remote learning, we first of all would be seeking to clarity on whether or not the guidance that we were given last year still applies this year, or if there's any changes to that. We would communicate that information out to parents at the time. And then as per any sort of concern or question that you have about your child's learning or the instruction that's taking place, we find that the communication model that we really adhere to and ask people to try to follow is first to contact your child's teacher if you have any concerns or any questions about what's happening or how it's happening. And if you're not satisfied with the response that you get there, then the next place to go would be your child's principal. Those are the two people that are going to be the biggest resource to you as a parent in helping to resolve those questions. But lastly, if after all of that, you're still not satisfied with the responses that you have, then that's where our superintendents of family of schools are here as a resource for you as well.
Okay, for secondary schools, how will lunch work? Will cafeterias be open?
So I think Superintendent Wynn, are you going to speak to that for us?
Yes, thank you, Director Burrell. So schools are currently looking at their layout of their school and their cafeterias, and they're reviewing the guide, the operational guide. So one thing they want to make sure is that they have supervision in place and once again, distancing. So they are currently in that process right this week, and they'll be talking with their staff. We have a couple PD days coming up this week, so 2 days. So they'll be discussing that. And then on the first day, they'll be communicating for students what to expect. So it may look different in some of the secondary schools. There will be options for students to eat outside and for them to, if they wish, to leave school property as well, and looking at other spaces on school property as well too. So it's not just the cafeteria.
One of the things that we also know, so if students are eating inside with their cohort, there's different distancing requirements than if they're in a mixed cohort. So if they're in a mixed space, the one thing that we know is that we need to maintain 2 meters between people when they're eating in an indoor space.
The next question is also for Superintendent Wynn. Will secondary students be getting lockers this year?
So that's another area where the principals are talking to their staff as well in the coming days as well too. We, as Superintendent Lee Fernandez mentioned earlier, our emphasis is on mental health and transitioning our students in successfully. So we see that as a phase later on. Probably, the initial couple weeks, we want to make sure students feel comfortable entering the building and going to their classes. And then we see, lockers probably not something to expect the first week, but it could be something that will evolve in the coming weeks or later on in the fall.
Okay, our next question is probably for Superintendent O'Neill. How many kids will there be in a class, both in the elementary and secondary?
Yes, thank you for the question. And hello, everyone. The class sizes in this current year will remain in compliance with the regular class sizes as outlined by the Ministry of Education. With children in our kindergarten classrooms, they will be below 30. The primary classrooms, 90% of those classrooms will be at 20 or under. The other 10%, we have flexibility to move up to 23. And in grades 4 through 8, the average class size across the system would be 24 and a half. The secondary classes, the class size average across the system per subject, per credit, would be 23. Now, please keep in mind that we will be placing students in the classroom to ensure that there is appropriate physical distancing between the students. And so the principals will be working with the teachers to ensure that there is appropriate social distancing and ensuring there is appropriate space for your children to learn. We will be constantly monitoring the situation and working with those principals to make any adjustments to class sizes as necessary for physical distancing. And we will be monitoring that on a daily basis prior to school beginning. And we will ensure at all times that there is appropriate space with them, and the desks are separated within those classrooms, but there is within that cohort opportunities to work in small groups as well. Thank you.
Our next question is for Director Burrell. Why have the start and end times changed from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for high school students? I would like to understand the rationale and decision making behind this.
Thank you for that question. And I know that this is a question that has been on the minds of many of our parents and students in our secondary schools, not only here in our board, but also in the public board. The decision to move to a 10 to 4 day was not one that we embraced in terms of something that we wanted to have happen. So earlier in this presentation, I mentioned the fact that our transportation services are provided through a consortium. So that's Durham Student Transportation Services. That consortium is governed by a body that is made up of representatives from DSTS, representatives from the public board, and representatives from our board. Operationally, our consortium has to look at the overall system in the whole region in terms of being able to transport all students to and from school, and to do so within a certain number of routes. One of the biggest constrictions that we've had this year is a shortage of bus drivers, if you can believe it, in terms of being able to fulfill all of those routes. So we have a certain number of bus drivers that we know we will be able to secure for the upcoming school year. And then we have to route according to that number. I know that Director Marsh from the Public Board and I both spent a long time. So discussions about routing and the concerns that we had coming up for this year dated back to last January, where we looked at every possible configuration that we could put in place in order to be able to get all of our kids to and from school on the number of routes that we had available to us. The second consideration is that the province has still asked us to be prepared to be able to flip back into remote learning if that becomes a reality. You know, as I've said several times during this presentation, right now, that's not our goal. We're really hopeful as a board and as a province that we won't have to do that. But if we did have to do that, it would mean that our secondary students might have to flip back to a situation where they're in school for part of the day and learning at home for the other part of the day. And so with all of those factors in place, we had to look at being able to stack the routes. So essentially for the elementary students to be able to be brought to school first, and then for the bus drivers that are providing those routes to then be able to pick up the secondary students, bring them to school, then go pick up the elementary students and bring them home, and then get to the secondary schools and bring them back home. We really stretched it as far as we could, and unfortunately, this is where we are at. We are fortunate in our board in that that 10 to 4 day does impact 4 of our 7 secondary schools, but 3 of them have actually earlier starts. 2 of them because they are 7 to 12 schools, so they were able to be retained on the elementary school schedule, and 1 because it's a shared space with J. Clark Richardson, and we had to have time in between when the Notre Dame students arrive and when the J. Clark students arrive. So some of our schools still are on an earlier day, and we did share that slide in the presentation that we gave tonight. I recognize and fully accept that this is difficult for families, and we know students want to work after school, and sometimes their shifts start earlier. I have heard anecdotally from people that a number of the employers in the area, as soon as they heard that that's our day, that they've been good about trying to adjust those start times for their part-time students. We also know that for some it may be difficult for childcare and so on. I can tell you that if the province allows us to shift away from the quadmester system that we have to have in place this fall to a semester system in the second half of the school year, we will look to see if there's any opportunity to have some movement on that school day for the second half of 2021-2022.
Okay, this next question is for Superintendent Fernandez. How will teachers and/or EAs support students with unique needs that are in the hybrid model as compared to the in-person option?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'll try to answer this question as best as I can, knowing that every situation is unique. But maybe first starting again with the appropriate development of the IEP. Because of the unique hybrid situation, the goals are going to have to be really specific to what can and cannot be done through a virtual or remote platform. I think it's really about, again, working with the school team, with student input, parent guardian consultation to determine what the best methods to support the student and the classroom will be, whether that be from the classroom teacher, program support teacher, educational assistant, and other support staff that is available. For example, we do offer different platforms that we use. We have Zoom, we have Teams, and really working with the student and working to their strengths to make it as easy as possible to access that learning. You know, there may be specific scheduled times where there's one-on-one or small group support based on what the learning and what the needs might be for a specific subject area. Again, too, because it's hybrid, depending, especially particularly with alternative programming and depending on the specific subject, there may be materials, whether they're printed or otherwise, that would support learning, and maybe some type of pickup is scheduled between the school and the home to really support that learning and to make it more engaging at home. Again, I can't stress enough that even in hybrid, we have to be careful not to generalize. Like, students come with so many different strengths that they bring to the learning environment. So it really is about making sure that we harness those strengths and make sure that we don't make any assumptions about what students need to be successful. We're learning more and more about online resources and strategies that work. Our teachers are becoming more proficient. Student services will again provide some training directly for staff who are working with students in the virtual environment to support them in their special education needs. And I guess finally, just there may be, I'm not going to touch on every situation that could possibly happen, but just reinforcing that when issues arise or certain circumstances come to the forefront, again, as Director Burrill had stated, connecting back with the classroom teacher, the principal, and the school team, because we are 100% going to be working with students and their families to ensure that students have the best available programming possible.
Director Burrill, this is for you as well. What's happening with the volunteer hours requirements? And will the requirement remain 40 hours to graduate, or will this be adjusted due to pandemic restrictions?
Thanks for that question. So as many people will know, in addition to the credit accumulation that is required to get your Ontario secondary school diploma, there's also a requirement to put in a certain number of volunteer hours within your community. For the last couple of years, those requirements have been waived for our graduates. For this year, students who are graduating at the end of 2021, 2022, there will be a requirement of a minimum of 20 hours of volunteer time. And I can tell you that within that, the types of activities that students can do has also been expanded to include things like maybe some duties that are normally done in the home, for example, helping out elderly relatives and so on. And so there is a little bit of a broader expanse of what would qualify as a volunteer hour for this year's graduates. Anybody who is graduating beyond this June, however, at that time we will be returning to the full 40-hour requirement. So our students who are in grades 9 to 12 who are not graduating this year should certainly start thinking about the volunteer hours that they can put in order to be able to accumulate that 40 hours before they are set to graduate.
Okay, the next question I believe is for Superintendent O'Reilly. What training and support will the grade 9 teachers receive to help them deliver the new math curriculum?
Thank you. That's a great question. We're really excited about the implementation of the grade 9 Dstreamed Math credit course. So we began this year, we did a lot of learning. We began with a Dstreaming steering committee that was directing some of the, or helping to help direct some of the decisions made around programming. We've also worked already with the grade 9 teachers. We brought in a man named Jason Tao. He is quite well known around the province for his work in equity and his work in math. And so he led a session for us around moving forward with with the Dstreaming Math. We've had a group of amazing math educators working on a resource to support math teachers, the grade 9 math teachers, with all sorts of materials that will help them deliver a really excellent course that we're so excited about. We will be offering ongoing professional learning. We will work with all teachers that are teaching this course. We have consultants that will also support. We've been purchasing some resources to support the teachers in really delivering an excellent program. And we are really committed to de-streaming in allowing students, ensuring students get to grade 12 with the most choices available to them possible. So we really have a great plan and are looking forward to the implementation. Thank you.
The next question is also for either Superintendent O'Reilly or Superintendent Wynne. How is the board helping teachers to improve the skills in terms of online learning and various ways to engage kids using different tools and technology?
Thanks, Erin. I'll jump in here. If that's okay with Superintendent O'Reilly. It's impressive when you think of where we were a year ago, how each of us here this evening, what we have accomplished, even myself on a personal level. My daughters are always showing me little tricks here and there, how to navigate the technology. And I know parents are learning a lot at home as well too. And so we hope to tap into that expertise on our PD days coming up in this week and have a sharing of best practices. There's a lot of skill level out there where people have learned at home during the lockdown and remotely. So our principals will be reaching out to staffs and doing a needs assessment in terms of what technology do you need for the upcoming school year? What are some skills and things that will help you as we move forward? We also have some sessions planned as well for after school lunch hours in the coming months as well, sharing of excellence throughout the system. And then we'll also have other time devoted on PD days as well to support staff moving forward.
This next question is going to be for Superintendent Wilson. Will rapid testing be available if students demonstrate symptoms?
Thank you for that question, Rose. Currently, the Ministry of Education has been working closely with the Ministry of Health and Ontario Health to develop a testing plan grounded in guidance from the Ontario Chief Medical Office. They want to ensure that there's consistent access to testing for childcare and school-age children. Currently, the Ministry of Education is running a testing pilot program with schools, and we have 3 Durham Catholic secondary schools that are participating. Those being Archbishop Dennis O'Connor, Notre Dame, and Father Don McQuillan. Thank you.
Superintendent Wilson, this is also for you. How many COVID cases need to be in one cohort to decide when all the students in the cohort will have to isolate?
Thank you for that question, Erin. Again, we as previously mentioned by Director Burrell, we welcome and value our partnership with the Durham Region Health Department. And once there is a positive case in a class, the public health nurse will determine which students within the class will have to isolate. So initially, the cohort is dismissed pending investigation. The fully vaccinated students will return to school and monitor for symptoms. The students that are not fully vaccinated will isolate for 10 days, and all students will be tested. The fully vaccinated students can be tested immediately, and the not fully vaccinated students will be tested on day 7 of exposure. Thank you.
Okay, this next question is for Director Burrell. Will students be required to complete and show COVID screening test results each day upon entering the school? If so, what is the format or application of the test to be used?
Thank you for that. And so what we have been told by the Ministry of Education right now in the operational guidance is that we do have to have a plan in place in order to be able to have confirmation of self-assessment at school if we're asked to do it. And so whether or not we are asked to confirm through like a note, a signature, a mobile app or whatever that people have completed the self-assessment will be determined by our local situation here in Durham region, what our numbers are looking like and so on, and whether or not our chief medical officer tells us that we need to take up that practice. Regardless of where we're at, we have received direction from the Ministry of Education that has been consistent across the whole province that for the first 2 weeks of school, we will be requiring confirmation of self-assessment. In secondary, it's likely that we will continue the practice that we put in place last year, where we will use the board's mobile app to be able to access the self-assessment screening tool, and students will be able to show their check mark to their teachers as they come in. If they don't have a mobile device, they will be asked individually around that to confirm it. We recognize, however, that for younger students, that's not really an optimal approach, especially our littlest ones. We want their parents to be able to confirm that. And so we're working on just basically like a paper kind of, you remember the old agendas and you had to sign in the agenda every day that you had seen it. So something similar to that, that will have a list of the screening questions on it, and then a place to sign each day by the parent to indicate that their students or that the children are free of those symptoms.
Director Burrell, this is also for you. Will staff be required to disclose their vaccination status? And what is the percentage of staff and teachers that are fully vaccinated?
So thank you for that question. I don't know the answer to that question just yet in terms of the percentage of our staff that are fully vaccinated, but that is a piece of information that we will be required once we have that data collected to post on our board website. And so in terms of mandatory disclosure, yes, the province has put in place for the education sector a mandatory disclosure policy. So in essence, all staff members as well as regular visitors to the school will be asked to disclose their vaccination status. Currently, our Chief Information Officer, Mr. Rodriguez, is working with other ICT departments across the province to put in place a collection tool that will allow us to collect that information in a confidential manner from our staff. There is an actual electronic security feature on the official COVID vaccination attestation forms. And so we're looking at a type of electronic collection system that will recognize and authenticate that those vaccine disclosures are actual real vaccine attestations. And so we are hoping that we will have that process ironed out this week. We have been asked by the Ministry of Education to have that data collected by September 7th. And so that is our goal right now. Our staff have been informed that the vaccination disclosure will be something that will be required of them. And then staff who are not fully immunized also will have other requirements as well. So if a staff member for whatever reason is not fully vaccinated, they will be required to complete an education tutorial around vaccinations and also to provide regular negative COVID tests to be able to attend work.
This last question is for Superintendent Fernandez. What mental health supports are available to our children as they transition back to school?
Okay, thank you for the question. Again, as I had mentioned during the presentation, School Mental Health Ontario continues to provide extensive resources to support student mental health needs, everything from Tier 1, which is the general universal mental health support, to Tier 3, which is allowing us to be able to have the knowledge and the information to be that bridge to health and community supports. When I talk about School Mental Health Ontario, I should also mention our incredible mental health leader, Diane Moulane. She works tirelessly to curate and channel appropriate resources to various staff groups that are specific to grades and ages. So our entire staff is focused on a mentally healthy return to school, as we were last year. So I'll just give you some examples of some of the resources that are available and have been already given out to all of our educators. First is the first 10 days of school, which is an excellent sort of an array of activities that will support a positive transition back into classrooms, really with that trauma-informed lens, and making sure that students are able to talk about their feelings, to talk about their experiences, and support them as they work through these first days of re-entry back into school. Second, our staff have access to daily activities that are readily accessible and very easy to use, that don't take a lot of time, but really make a huge difference in calming students down or bringing students sort of to a place of just calm and a place ready to learn after, whether it's breaks or certain activities or recess. Our child and youth counselors are working within classrooms to deliver whole group instruction on mental health, on positive mental health and strategies. One of the programs that they use that you may have heard of is called Mind Up. So there are some great things that are happening this is for all students as we come back. And again, I think part of what helps students or what provides those supports to students are their classroom teachers and the administrators and those that they see around them every day at school. So a big focus for us around mental health is training for gatekeeper roles. And by gatekeeper roles, that might be, for example, guidance teachers, program support teachers, and administrators. And they really help with that tier 2 intervention for students who might need that little bit of extra support. And not that they themselves provide that support, but they are sort of those key people who can see some of those emerging issues and intervene early whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish to thank everyone for joining us online tonight. We hope this evening has helped answer some of your questions about the 2021-2022 school year. We also want to thank all of you for your partnership and patience during this time. I know that more questions will likely pop up as we transition back into school or virtual hybrid learning, and as new information is shared with us. We also want to thank the director and senior administrative team for their time this evening, and we hope to continue to provide informational sessions for DCDSB families in the future. As a friendly reminder, please visit www.dcdsb.ca/return to learning webpage for up-to-date information on the 2021-2022 school year. For further information on the Durham Catholic Parent Involvement Committee, please visit www.dcpic.ca. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Good night.